Recall the parallel structure of the visions of Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. Recall the divided fourth kingdom. Recall that this is God's fallen church. Recall the parallel pictures of the fall of the church in the two visions. Returning back to Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 parallels, what is God's answer to his fallen church? The fifth kingdom, God's kingdom. Another parallel. Daniel 7 reads, "Thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days did sit. The judgment was set, and the books were opened." Verses 9 and 10. While Daniel 2 talks of a mountain, verse 45, which becomes without hands, that is, by a supernatural act, that mountain with a chunk missing, a stone-sized chunk, plus a stone, that missing chunk, verse 34 and 45. And this process on the mountain is interpreted by Daniel as setting up a kingdom, verse 44. But Daniel 2's process on the mountain is exactly what Daniel 7, 9, and 10 describes. A judgment, a heavenly judgment. And it sets up a kingdom, God's heavenly kingdom. How do we know? How do we know these two visions are speaking of the same event? Because Daniel 7 continues, "One like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him, and there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom." Verses 13 and 14. A kingdom. The heavenly judgment of Daniel 7 produces a kingdom, which is indeed the exact same story that Daniel 2's mountain and stone just told us. And in Daniel 2, the stone, verses 34 and 45, is the kingdom, as is made clear, you will notice, in verses 44 and 45. "The kingdom shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms." Verse 44. "Forasmuch as thou sawest that the stone break in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold." Verse 45. Thus, the mountain, God's professed church or kingdom, is cut up without hands. That is, it undergoes a supernatural or heavenly judgment to extract and leave just a stone, God's true church or kingdom. But that stone is not just God's true church or kingdom, but is that kingdom headed by its king, the one like the Son of Man, which becomes a great mountain that fills the whole earth. Daniel 2:35. Conclusion: the judgment is part of both Daniel chapters 2 and 7. But there is more. The destruction of the statue and beasts happened in 3 phases. Daniel 2 reads, "A stone, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces." Verse 34. While Daniel 7 reads, "The nondescript beast was slain, and his body destroyed, and given to the burning flame." Verse 11. The present kingdom is destroyed. The feet of the statue and the nondescript beast are the fourth and final kingdom on earth, our present world. Daniel 2 continues, "Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together." Verse 35. While Daniel 7 implies, the first 3 beasts of Daniel 7 are destroyed. All kingdoms destroyed. This is implied of the beasts in Daniel 7. As we read in verse 12, "As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and time." But this implies there is an intervening period between the 2 destructions. What happens during this period? to Daniel 2's statue specifically. With regards to its feet, verse 34 reads, "Break them to pieces." The underlying Hebrew means to pulverize, to turn into powder. But notice verse 35, the iron, the clay, broken to pieces together. Broken to pieces together is the same underlying Hebrew, meaning to pulverize. And the only place that clay exists is in the feet. How do you pulverize a second time? After all, the clay, that is the feet, were already pulverized in verse 34. So how can it be pulverized again in verse 35? Note, to be able to pulverize a second time implies a prior reforming. The 3 prior kingdoms are preserved, and then all the kingdoms are resurrected. But there is more. The 3 phases of destruction of the statue and beasts in Revelation. Daniel 2's stone and the destruction of the feet is Revelation's 7 angels with the bowls containing the 7 last plagues. Daniel 2's rest of the statue remains and the feet are reformed is Revelation's millennium and the resurrection of the wicked. Daniel 2's stone and the destruction of the statue is Revelation's New Jerusalem and the lake of fire, the destruction of the wicked. Conclusion? Daniel tells the same story as Revelation. Recall God's fallen church. So what is his answer to it? To this situation? What is his solution? To bring in the 5th kingdom, his kingdom, through the judgment. In summary then, there are 3 phases to the judgment. 1. The investigative phase, where God's professed church is judged and his true people are separated from the hypocrites, those professing the name but lacking the fruits. 2. The executive phase, part 1, in which God pours out judgment on the wicked of this present world in the form of the 7 last plagues. And 3. The executive phase, part 2, in which God rains fire down on the wicked of all ages, putting an end to sin and sinners forever.